Next, we are quickly jumping on to our presentation session. So may I please take the honor to welcome Mr. Alexandre Van De Rijt, Associate Partner, McKinsey and Company. The session is powered by Airhead plus Lemur GmbH. May I please request Mr. Alexandre Van De Rijt to please come up on the dais and share a detailed presentation with us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and very good morning to all of you while we're setting up the IT here. Very pleased to be here this morning. My name is Alexandre Van De Rijt. I'm an associate partner at McKinsey and Company. We're management consultants, and we advise companies across the world on all possible topics, and my focus is on batteries and energy storage. We do a lot across the entire value chain for batteries, from the upstream mining, the active materials, the manufacturing gigafactories, bringing them at scale across the world, all the machinery that's needed to do that, and then all the applications downstream for mobility, for stationary storage. And today I would like to talk about the mismatch of lithium-ion batteries, the supply versus demand across the world, because we will see a couple of interesting things here. So to start with, we have mapped demand for batteries across the world. This is here summing up different types of batteries, lithium-ion, sodium-ion, lithium-sulfur. To give you a sense of the order of magnitude, we're talking something like 5.86 terawatt hours of need for batteries in the world by 2030. And if we focus on just lithium-ion for a second, this is how this looks for the different applications. So I'm going to use 2026 as a marker for this presentation today for one specific reason. Is 2026 is a good balance to judge where demand and supply will be. You'll see in a second, 2030 is good for demand, but the supply is still unsure. So keep this number in mind, 2.8 terawatt hours, right? And that is split roughly 90% going into mobility, 10% going into stationary storage, and then a bit left for consumer electronics. I think what we're seeing happening over time is more and more movement in the stationary storage. So I actually expect this number to continue going up as we evolve our models over time. And then if you look at the split by region, that's also what we heard earlier, right? China is a massive pool for batteries. And demand is about 40% of global demand just in China. It's 50% today even, right? And that's driven by electrification and so on. European Union, US, very big. I actually plotted India on there. In our models, it's currently 3%. And that's driven mostly by 2-, 3-wheelers, buses we heard earlier. But you definitely see a trend, like the development of India is lagging what China has been doing the last couple of years, for sure. Now, I said we're going to look at demand versus supply. So what do we do on supply? It's a little more complicated. We start by tracking all the announcements in the world. Right? We have a whole team that does nothing else than that. Right? They make sure they understand every announcement for every factory, what type of batteries they will be doing, when they will ramp up, and so on and so on. And that gives us, for 2026, 5.6 terawatt hour of supply. Just going back 1 second, so I remember, we're looking at 2.8 terawatt hours of demand. 5.6 terawatt hours of supply has been announced for 2026 alone. And the reason I focus here on 2026 is that 2030 is far away. You have time enough to build a new gigafactory, get the investment, everything, or not build it, right? So it's a little less certain what's going to happen by then. But just out of interest, I asked my team, so where do we are on India? For 2030, we have, I think, 45 gigawatt hours now announced. There might be more in the planning. This is official public data, but that's what we can base our information on. Now, you're going to say, well, nice that you announced 5.6 terawatt hours, but we all know the reality is not going to be that, because if you announce a factory for whatever it is, 20 gigawatt hours, right? That's the announced nameplate capacity. Out of that, first of all, you'll be late. Like we see an average 6-7 months currently when building a factory to actually being ready between the announcements. So if you say I will have 20 gigawatt hours in 2026, guess what? It will be a little late, likely. Second, it takes time to ramp up a factory. Right? Your utilization the first year will be like 65%. Like if you're lucky, you'll get it up to 75, 85% after 1, 2, 3 years. But it takes time. And yield losses, right? Your yield will be something like 85%. So you're summing up all these steps one by one, right? It's going to reduce your actual supply massively. Finally, there's one more point. There's a lot of announcements in the world, but not all of them are realized. So what we've been doing is we've actually calculated what we call the likelihood of realization. And we look at different factors like, has the company found land to build? Right? Do they have investment? Do they have a leadership team? Do they have IP? Have they started construction? And so on. And out of that, we create this likelihood, and you'll see it maps again like different stages or different probabilities of actually seeing this. I'm bringing all of that together, still looking at 2026. We said 5.6 announced, 3.8 is more likely what we're going to see. So that, again, comes back to the 2.8 that I announced before. So in the world, for 2026, we're looking at an oversupply of almost 1 terawatt hour of production. Don't need to tell you that this is massive. It gets even more interesting if you start looking at that across the world. This is what we see today, 2026. I'll start in the middle here, just because it's so high. China, right, is in massive oversupply compared to their own demand, local demand. And we're talking about 100%. So they can actually produce twice as much as is actually needed. And that compares to all the other regions in the world that are in undersupply. Now, the undersupply is a bit different depending on where you are. Europe is definitely going to be in undersupply. Reasons for that. IRA, so Inflation Reduction Act for the US, we'll talk in a second about that, but that has been driving investments away. Right? So we'll likely see that continue. North America, you see the gap is not that big. Right? So what we've seen happening in the last year is actually that a lot of new announcements going there. So policy matters. Right? Regulatory changes matters. You can see what effect it has now. If I had held this presentation last year, right, the gap would have been much bigger. And then we have India, and we have the rest of the world. They're like, India is, as you see, right, on scale is still very small. And I hope it will grow. Right? That's also why I'm coming here today, right, to hear a bit what's happening. But there's a lot of potential up. But the story is the same for India and for the rest of the world. They're all in undersupply. What does it mean? Well, China can just supply the whole world. And China has actually an issue because they're building so many factories today. Right? Their utilization is low. If you go to China today, their utilization is 60, 70% at most of their factories. Right? So they have an issue, and they're doing everything they can to sell their batteries across the world. I'm serving different companies, some of them, for example, in stationary storage, right? They're being overwhelmed by Chinese cell manufacturers trying to sell their cells at very, very competitive prices. Right? Massive pressure there. One more thing that's interesting, and that's why I wanted to show this chart. We track what kind of company is making these cells, and we have 3 colors. The black ones is what we call incumbents. Think CATL, BYD, CALB. Right? The light blue ones are OEM JVs or subsidiaries, like companies working together with car manufacturers. And then the dark blue ones are new startups. Just look at the difference between Europe and China. China is 80% driven by big incumbents. They know how to make a cell. They know how to make it cheap. They have tons of money to improve R&D, right, and make their product even better. Europe, where I'm coming from for comparison, right? A third coming from these incumbents. A third is auto JVs. They're actually learning this stuff. And a third is startups. They're nice, they startups. They have great ideas. But honestly, they have still a long way to go, right? To be competitive in pricing and so on. The only thing they can hope for is to leapfrog, having some technology improvements, being faster in whatever it is, right? Solid state or silicon anodes or whatsoever. Right? That's their hope, because otherwise there's no chance you can compete. And I think you can bring this back, this story, right, back to India. Think about that. So what I would like to do is also have a bit of a discussion or questions about it, but a few thoughts before we close this, right? As said, China, based on this data, this information, right, will remain a massive competitive exporter. There is no chance to stop that just because of the advancement, the investment that has been in capex, what they have been building up in technology, knowledge, and so on, right? You have to live with that. Right? At the same time, China is struggling. They have built too much. So either they'll stop building for a bit, right, and catch up, it's possible, right? But likely they will continue playing this very competitive cost game. Right? The second thing to think about, right, in what segment do you want to play? Right? Koreans, Japanese companies may be playing a little different angles, right? So something to consider. What I said earlier, and I'm combining a bit what we saw in the United States. This Inflation Reduction Act has completely changed the landscape. Right? Within a couple of months of announcement, right, we saw hundreds of gigawatt hours, right, moving away from Europe into the US. Right? Billions in investments. And there was just one last week again, if you're following, Northvolt, and so on and so on. Right? You need to work with your regulators. You need to work with policymakers if you want to enable the battery industry to succeed, right? And we've seen it also happen here, right? I think there's a lot of incertitude. There's like this BYD announcement, then not, then there's been several, right? You need to get through that to make sure your battery builds up. And then last thing, on these startups, right? It takes more time to build something when you've never done it before. It takes time to find the talent. It takes time to ramp up. We're working with a lot of gigafactories, like the new ones. They really struggle. It's a new process. You need to reinvent how you do things. You need to tune your machinery. It's really hard. So you need to think, what will be your competitive edge? How will you compete against, I can name 10 of them, right? The Chinese, Korean players and so on that have scale. You don't. So you need to come with something else. And also that will apply to India, right? Either you bring in the knowledge from other countries, which is a valid play, right? But if you build it up from yourself here, right, how will you compete given this ecosystem? Perfect. My name is Alex Van De Rijt. I'd love to open up for questions if you have any. I'll be around here for more questions. Thank you for having me here today.
Thank you so much, Mr. Alexander, for sharing your detailed insights with us throughout the presentation. May I please take the honor on behalf of Informa Markets India to share a token of appreciation with you?